So we will now start the roundtable. Thank you all for joining us for Ann Arbor for Public Power's first of hopefully many community roundtables on this important topic of public power. We've assembled a fantastic panel of various experts in the fields, and I'm hoping that we're going to have a fantastic conversation tonight. The format of this roundtable will be that we will begin with some short introductions from everyone. We will then move into a few prepared questions. Each panelist has selected 2 questions to answer, and then we will move into questions from the audience. To ask a question, you can ask in the Q&A, and we will move through them. Unfortunately, if there are too many questions, we may not be able to get to all of them, but we will do our absolute best. And we will also record all questions and attempt to answer them in some other means if there is any that we are not able to get to. So thank you all for joining us once again. I'm going to go around and introduce each of you and allow you to just give a quick, brief introduction about who you are and kind of what your relation to public power is and things like that. So starting us off, Desirae, would you like to give yourself an introduction?
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Desirae Simmons. I am a co-director with the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice. I live in the city of Ypsilanti, and so I do most of my troublemaking over on the eastern side of the county. Although we know that the connections are real between Ypsi and Ann Arbor. One of the things I do there is I'm on the Sustainability Commission in Ypsi. And so I care a lot about what happens around in this area regionally, really. And I also, as part of the work I do with ICPJ, we are a member of the Michigan Alliance for Justice and Climate, or MAGIC, as you would hear me talk about it, that has been doing work really looking statewide and at the federal level as well. And so that's just a little bit about me. And I have a 5-year-old child, which really puts at the top of my list, making sure that we have a very clean and sustainable and just future for her. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Senator Jeff Irwin, if you could give yourself a quick introduction.
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg. I'm Jeff Irwin. I am the state senator for the 18th district, and I represent most of the folks in Washtenaw County, certainly all the folks in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and many of the communities around there, going down to Saline and Milan. Before I was a state legislator, I had an opportunity to serve on the County Board of Commissioners and to serve as executive director of the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. And in that second role, my job was to elect a pro-environment state legislature. And after doing that for several years and trying to advocate for clean water policy and better energy policy to protect our air, I had the opportunity to run for office and have been really honored to serve our community for a number of years, where I'm working on a broad range of issues, but specific to energy. One of the issues that I've been working on for many years is this coming revolution of distributed generation. And 10 years ago, we were on the cusp, and now we're looking at a reality where it is cheaper and cleaner for folks to generate energy at the tips of the network. And we need to make sure our laws are aligned with that. And I see Ann Arbor for Public Power as not just moving that goal forward, but also moving forward the real idea of power to the people and democratization of these essential services for our people. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Liz Radzloff, could you give yourself a quick introduction?
Sure. I'm Liz Radzloff. I work for the Labor Network for Sustainability. I'm also one of the co-chairs, along with Michelle Dietrich, who can't be here, of the Just Transition Committee as a part of the Huron Valley Area Labor Federation. And I'm also the vice president of the newly formed Worker Center, Huron Valley Worker Center, which hopefully y'all hear about more in the future. And I'm really interested in and the idea of a just transition. So making sure that we redistribute wealth, democratize wealth, and democratize the workplace. And I see the transition to green energy as a part of that process, and making sure that people have good jobs that provide them to lead great lives. And I'm happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you. Happy to have you. Chris Bzdok, could you give yourself a quick introduction?
Thanks, Greg, and hello, everybody. My name is Chris Bzdok. I am a lawyer. I'm based in Traverse City. I do climate and energy work, mostly for environmental groups, also some renewable energy developers. I've also done this kind of work for the cities of Flint and Grand Rapids. I've done consumers' energy cases for them. Most of my work is at public utility commissions in Michigan and some other states, Oregon, Ohio, Illinois. Dealing with the rates and charges of utilities and how they impact on the plans that utilities, investor-owned utilities, private profit-driven utilities make about where they get their power from and how they distribute it and what they charge for it. I think I'm here also because I used to be the mayor of Traverse City, and I also served on the board of Traverse City Light and Power, our municipal utility. So I can speak to that perspective as well. And I'm very pleased to be invited to be here tonight.
Thank you so much, Chris. Sean McBrearty.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Greg. I'm Sean McBrearty, and I'm the Michigan Legislative and Policy Director for Clean Water Action. Been working on different energy policy issues for about the last decade at this point, including some work at the state level. I do a lot of work on the Line 5 campaign through Oil and Water Don't Mix. And I've been involved in some local energy policy issues, especially here in the Lansing area with Lansing Board of Water and Light, which is another municipal utility. And I can talk about sort of some of the differences we notice in this area between Lansing, which has its own municipal utility, and some of the surrounding communities that rely on consumers and DTE. And just sort of some of the big differences that we see in this part of the state from having a municipal utility. So yeah, very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Yousef Rabhi.
Hello, yes, thank you so much for having me on this call. As you can see, I'm still in the office and it is a snowy day outside, so I'm happy to be here with all of you and share this conversation. As was said, my name is Yousef Rabhi, state representative from the 53rd District, representing most of the city of Ann Arbor. I also serve in the State House as the Democratic floor leader. And you'll excuse me that my voice is a little hoarse because I was screaming at the top of my lungs at a rally today in support of my brothers and sisters in the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, that are protesting some racist behavior from their contractors. And we were protesting outside of the Associated Builders Council, which essentially represents the contractors. And we were protesting outside their office today. So, but I've been proud to, be in this space and advocate for public power, public ownership of our utilities. For many years, I've advocated for the city of Ann Arbor to look at municipalization. We need to take control of our own power. And we'll get into this discussion today, but I've had a front row seat to see how the utilities, the consumers and DTEs, for-profit utilities, have had sway and influence in Lansing to kill good legislation like the bills that Jeff and I have been introducing around distributed generation to make sure that people have access to put solar panels on their roofs. You can see the solar panel behind me here was my first bill passed and signed into law by the governor, was a pro-solar bill to help distributed generation. She signed my bill on that solar panel, and I hang it proudly in my office because this is something that is going to be critical if we're going to take control of our climate future and solve the problem of climate change. And we can do that, and we can create a resilient grid that is owned by the people, where we're not sending our money to Wall Street. We're reinvesting our dollars here in our community, and we can do that by creating a locally owned, locally run municipal utility. That's why I'm glad to be here today to help advocate and talk through the ins and outs of what that'll look like. Thanks so much for having me, Greg.
Thank you so much, Yousef. And thank you all for joining us. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, Michelle Dietrich is not able to join us today, but hopefully we'll be able to have her on a future roundtable meeting. But moving into our next segment, we will be moving into, we have 6 prepared questions, and each person will be speaking to 2 of them. And to start us off, we are looking at the questions of what problems are we currently facing under DTE? Liz, would you be willing to speak to this?
Yeah, happy to start us off today. So as many of you know, Michigan has among the country's least reliable electric grid in terms of frequency and length of outages. And that's largely due to, a number of things, but inadequate tree trimming and a lack of investment in aging equipment. And so that leaves us really vulnerable to the strong storms that are increasingly more frequent. And so DTE has blamed grid problems on the trees in Michigan, but really DTE and regulators are responsible for this. So DTE trims trees every 9 years, but the industry standard is every 5 years. They also trim branches within a few feet of lines instead of taking care of things that threaten wires. And I think mainly DTE makes money for shareholders by building new power plants and other things. So they're not performing preventative maintenance and so the cost of this work falls on customers. Personally, I recently tried to get a dead tree removed in my backyard, and the professional tree trimmer said it's too dangerous for them to remove and I should call DTE. DTE said they're not willing to remove trees outside of scheduled maintenance, and that my neighborhood hasn't been released for maintenance trimming. I think that my trees were trimmed in 2019, so that means I could expect them to come out in 2028. But what's more is they won't trim up around the lines that bring electricity to my house. So they suggest using a professional tree trimming service, which I've done. And if I want a private contractor to be safe, I'll have to get an estimate to the field supervisor, sign a permit. So for now, I'm hoping that the more frequent storms don't cause the tree to fall on my house while I save up money to try to find someone who's willing to work with DTE. But there's also, I also mentioned the aging infrastructure. So DTE has a replace when it breaks approach to upgrading old equipment, and equipment's being used longer than its expected life, and the poles are brittle and they patch up damaged wires instead of replacing them. And I'm all for repairing and reusing things, but at this point we have a lot of old equipment that needs faster replacement. And DTE spends a lot of money on political contributions, which happen to protect them from having to change. And a lot of money goes to executive bonuses and other measures that don't improve reliability. DTE is also the 3rd dirtiest major utility in the country by carbon dioxide emission rates. So their current plant keeps coal online for too long, and it ignores the carbon emissions by transitioning to natural gas. So with the current plan, people living in low-income communities and communities of color bear the brunt of the consequences of the current plan, both with high energy bills and with exposure to pollution. And in terms of affordability, our costs are much higher than the national average, and even higher if like me, you pay more to DE to get renewable sources. So even in Chelsea, Michigan, not far away from us, electric rates are half of what we pay DTE. And like I mentioned, we pay money to shareholders, to lobbyists, not to mention the costs of trimming our own trees and the costs associated with frequent power outages like spoiled food, hotels, etc. I'm sure that there's plenty more to say about our current situation, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Liz. And Representative Rabhi, would you like to add on to what problems are we currently facing under DTE?
Absolutely. I would love to. Liz did a fantastic job. I have a few other angles that I'd like to take with this. Just quickly in response to what she just said about the spoiled food and the outages, I have a bill that I'm going to be introducing that's going to force DTE and consumers to reimburse people on a per hour that their power is out basis, and that they would have to compensate if you have like a small business that lost all of their refrigerated goods, that or even a Kroger, larger store, they could send that bill to DTE and say, you caused me to lose $90,000 of inventory. You have to pay that. And the utilities need to be held accountable. I'm going to keep on introducing legislation that holds them accountable. But that segues me into the fundamental problem that exists with DTE and consumers today, which is we say that these are regulated utilities, but that is the greatest misnomer that could be mischaracterizing what they do and how they exist in our state. They are regulated in name only. And unfortunately, with the amount of money that they spend making and breaking elections across our state, they are unfortunately the fox guarding the hen house. And when you see the power and influence that they have over legislators and over what legislation gets to move and what legislation doesn't, I can tell you from firsthand personal experience, they are the regulators. And unfortunately, if we don't take our power back and create our own municipal utility, we are not going to get past the things that we need. Directly to one of the questions that popped into the chat that I saw, around home solar, distributed generation. I think Tim posted a question about, wanting to install, solar panels. One of those bills, one of those pieces of legislation that I've been working on, that I've helped to draft back in 2017, that we've introduced every session that I've been in office, is a bill to remove the cap on distributed generation. Right now in the state of Michigan, no more than 1% of the power generated in the consumers and DTE service areas can be from distributed generation. That cap is in place and DTE and consumers are enforcing it. In contrast, and by the way, the legislation that we've introduced, DTE and consumers are fighting tooth and nail. They are spending a lot of money in Lansing to make sure that that never passes our bill to eliminate the cap on distributed generation so that more people can install solar on their roofs. They are fighting that tooth and nail. They do not want it to pass. They have done everything in their power to make sure that it does not move out of committee, and so far it hasn't. But in contrast, if you look at Lansing Board of Water and Light, which is a publicly owned utility, they are giving a $2,000 incentive to their citizens to install solar on their roof. That's the difference, is that with a publicly owned municipal utility, we have control of what happens and we can encourage more people to install their own solar panels on their roofs. So to Tim's question, it actually works in synergy with municipalization, that people can put solar on their roof. It will not be in conflict. It will be supportive of the overall process of municipalization, and it will be more supported if we control our energy future versus having the fox guarding the hen house regulatory environment that we currently have, which is ultimately for the purpose of protecting DTE and consumers' monopoly and their profits. And I will say that, a slight wave, I know that there are people on this call who are here from Team DTE, who are listening in, who are hearing what we're saying, who are going to be asking questions to try to trip us up. I already see that in the Q&A section. And I want you to know that when we, the people, take control of our power, we remove ourselves from the corruption that takes place in Lansing, and that prevents good policy from moving forward, that prevents our environment from being protected. And frankly, the time has never been more pressing than now for us to take back control. And one last thing I want to say to Liz's point about consumers in DTE and their promises around their net zero promises. If you were to just read their billboards, DTE and consumers put up a lot of lofty words on billboards. They say they're going to be net zero by 2050. You have to read the fine print. You have to read between the lines, because they are essentially lying to you. They are saying net zero, but net zero means that they can still buy carbon offsets. Net zero means that they can still invest in lots of natural gas. Natural gas is not a clean fuel. Natural gas emits methane into the environment. Our atmosphere cannot sustain more CO2, and it cannot sustain more methane. Methane is emitted at the point of fracking. It is emitted at the throughout our natural gas pipeline infrastructure, and that is causing just as much harm to our environment. And so DTE and consumers are essentially lying to you when they say that their plan is to move to net zero by 2050. It is completely misleading. We can do better. We, the people, can take power, and that's what we need to be looking at.
Thank you so much, Representative Rabhi. And I think that that moves us fantastically into our next question. Desirae, should Ann Arbor replace DTE with a public power utility?
Yes. Is that good? I should go back on mute? No. Yeah, no, thanks for that. I was trying to catch up on what was happening in the Q&A too, but I guess I have a couple of things to say just to this. One is, you know, just like starting at basic level of, you know, can anybody imagine living without electricity today, right? You know, and thinking about once we get to really a certain threshold of community-wide need, that it just makes me think, why is it that we only are relying then on private sourcing and not public power? Just at a baseline piece for me. So I would say yes to there. Also, one of the things, you know, I know when thinking about public power, that does not necessitate green power, right? Doesn't necessitate cleaner power, but that what we've seen is that it does tend to be cleaner, and because it's a public power, and if we think about really that public accountability and pushing, right, that there is the responsiveness to the community to be greener, right, and that's something that I think within the city of Ann Arbor, that there should be more than enough will to make a greener public utility. And so for that reason too, again, because we can push it faster, the time horizon that we have is not long enough to accept really the slowness that we're seeing out of DTE in terms of transitioning to more cleaner power, right? I know that later on, some folks are going to be talking specifically around things around the workforce, but I just feel like I have to mention that the jobs and the possibility for economic mobility for many in the community, regionally, really, that have lost opportunities once different industries have left the area, that this could be really big for folks. And I think about how, I mean, here in the city of Ypsilanti, so many people travel into Ann Arbor for work. And so when I think about who's going to be working in these spaces, I also think about what that means to my community here in the city of Ypsilanti and Ypsilanti Township, and knowing that a lot of folks would be coming from these areas to be working in these spaces. So I just want to kind of lift that up, which I know is not, you know, a reason that Ann Arbor might take this on, but I think for folks that really are thinking in solidarity in terms of what it will look like for us to address the economic mobility issues that we have within this county, that we have to be taking all opportunities to address this so that we move outside of being the bottom 8% of the counties nationwide for economic mobility. And so I think that there's, again, a will and a way for Ann Arbor to help lead in that work. The other thing I'll say, I don't know how some people will receive this really well, some people not so well, but I always feel like when I come in these kind of spaces, I also have to like call out capitalism, like just like, again, like off the beat, because we have to recognize that in order for us to get to the places we need to be going, we need different approaches. We need to be centering different values. And we have to recognize all the ways that we have to break up these monopolies, as Yousef was talking about earlier, and exerting collective power. And recognizing that within capitalism, there is no incentive for a private company to ever reduce prices, ever, which means that they will only go up. And I know personally, based on my electric bill that I've been seeing, that it has only been going up, up and up, right? You know, since I've been here. And so that will only continue. And public utilities tend to be less expensive for communities. So, and I know some communities had transitioned specifically only on a cost incentive space. So that's something that we have to really consider. And the last thing I'll say, which is this is, you know, again, like just a little bit off the, you know, I don't know, not so specific to Ann Arbor, but, you know, I think that it's interesting because we have folks at the federal level in Representative Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, who were putting forward a House resolution around public power utility, you know, public utilities at that level. And really thinking about like, how do we set these things up in terms of really strict and clear timelines for transitions to happen. And so I just think about like, if we can have change makers at all these levels of government, that we can align our efforts. And Ann Arbor, since I've been here, you know, Ann Arbor likes to be at the leading edge, right? So to me, that's just another reason why Ann Arbor should be pushing itself to be at the leading edge again and moving on to a public utility. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Desirae. Senator Irwin, same question to you. Should Ann Arbor replace DTE with a public power utility? And if so, or if not, why?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. You know, in thinking about this question, the first thing that comes to my mind is just to encourage folks to imagine what it would be like if somebody were to come in and say, we want to privatize the water utility in Ann Arbor. Right now, our water utility is providing water well and at a low rate. And I think that properly the community would be outraged if there was a plan to sell off our municipal water system to a private entity. So when I think about that, and I think about the fact that, you know, roughly half of the people in this nation receive their power from a public utility, and how essential this is, much like water, you know, it reminds me of why, when we created our state constitution, we put clauses in there to say that communities would forever have the right to provide power directly to their people. And so, in thinking about that and thinking about why that was there, I look around the state and I look around the country, but even just here in Michigan, when we look at the communities that have public power systems that are accountable to their voters and their people, what they get is they get power that is cheaper, that is cleaner, and that is more reliable. And so, you know, in my role as an elected official in the area, I really feel it's my obligation to investigate opportunities like this and make them available to the people. Because if we could have cheaper, cleaner, more reliable power, there's absolutely no reason we shouldn't be pursuing that goal just on those bases alone. And then when you think about our responsibility to a just economy that's been talked about a lot here, our responsibility to climate change and fighting climate change that's been talked about a lot here, those are all additional reasons why we not just should pursue this, but we have to pursue this idea. We have to characterize it. We have to understand just how much cheaper, just how much cleaner, and just how much more reliable our power could be if we retained public control over it, just like we do for our water quite successfully.
Thank you so much, Senator Irwin. Moving on here, Sean, what does the experience of other Michigan munis tell us about what Ann Arbor residents could expect with a municipal utility?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. You know, I think the first important point here is really more of a concept around energy democracy. It's important that the people are in control of how power is being produced. That's how we're going to be able to address the climate crisis, which you know, we're not doing what we can to address that right now. So having that public power and that democratization of our energy system is very important. Other things that can be expected from this are, I really like to use a story of Lansing in 2013, 2014. That winter, there was a big ice storm that knocked out power for over 40,000 Lansing households and Lansing and East Lansing area households. And in some places, and so then the ice storm knocked out power, and then it went into a snowstorm and a deep freeze, and it took about 2 weeks in the sub-zero weather for them to restore power to everybody from Board of Water and Light. Real, bad situation. Board of Water and Light and no other municipal utility is perfect. But here's what happened afterwards. Unlike when you get bad power outages with DTE and consumers and essentially nothing happens, what happened there was a huge public process in Lansing to hold the Board of Water and Light accountable. And they wound up doing a big year-long review process with a public commission appointed to review their protocols. They made over 100 distinct protocol changes. And we haven't had any issues like that since. We've had very minimal power outage problems since then. They actually had to change their maintenance and upkeep programs and make those more efficient. It's, so what you see is more accountability when the public is in control. And that's really an important thing, is having that public accountability. That right now, it's kind of the opposite way, right? DTE and consumers and the other big energy companies not only try to push people around at the local level, but they use all their lobbying money buying representation in the state capitol to stop laws from changing. We've luckily seen, since Attorney General Nessel has taken office, she's made a point of advocating on behalf of ratepayers at the Michigan Public Service Commission. Recently, she saved DTE ratepayers $110 million out of DTE's latest gas rate hike increase request. But until she came along, in the days of the Snyder administration, Schuette wasn't doing that to stand up for the people. Snyder's Public Service Commission was essentially granting whatever DTE and consumers would request. And it's the tail wagging the dog, where you've got these energy companies who are controlling what is happening with the majority of people in this state on energy policy issues, where the people ought to be in charge of that. And of course, it's not in, DTE doesn't see it in their financial interest to respond to the climate crisis. If they can't make a buck, or do it for some good PR, they're not gonna make any changes. The people having power and accountability are going to be able to create a situation where utilities are responding faster to the climate crisis, which is also critically important here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sean. And I'm going to move over. Chris, same question back to you. What does the experience of other Michigan munis tell us about what Ann Arbor residents can expect with a municipal utility?
Thank you. And I agree with what Sean said, and I'd offer, I think, 4 succinct reasons. One is cost. Municipal utilities are cheaper than investor-owned utilities by and large, and there are structural reasons for that. There's no baked-in profit margin. They don't pay taxes. They don't have the legacy generation on their books, at least not at the level that investor-owned utilities have. The second is reliability. Some of that is the accountability that Senator Irwin mentioned. The utility is accountable to the people who own it. I've been on Traverse City Light and Power for 24 years. I've experienced one outage longer than 8 hours in 24 years. Outages happen, but they get dealt with. They're not long. They get dealt with quickly. The third reason is green, and several commenters have mentioned, or several panelists have mentioned green over time, over the course of this discussion. Traverse City Light and Power has a goal to become 100% renewable. That's not net zero, that's 100% renewable. And they have some legacy contracts they're trying to deal with to get there, but they're taking every action within their power to get to that goal. And the third one is honestly pride of ownership. My neighbor is on the board. I was on the board. When I was on the city council, before I was the mayor at that time proposed to sell the utility. And I was, I think, sort of the tip of the spear in terms of opposing that proposal. And an old retired city council member from years earlier gave me this pencil that I think was this vintage pencil from the 1970s. And I don't know if that's going to show up or not. It says Traverse City Light and Power. And it says, we're public powerful. People take pride in owning the source of their power, and they like being serviced by their neighbors and by the people in their own community, and they like that the revenues received by that utility go back into their own community in a number of ways, both to support the infrastructure, to support the general fund of the city, and to support community projects. So, you know, it's a genuine hometown ownership. And so people really take pride in it. And that would be the fourth reason.
Thank you so much, Chris. Moving on, Senator Irwin, could you speak to some of the steps, how long it might take, and will it be worth it to municipalize?
Well, I think this is a challenging question because different communities have had different experiences, and it's been a long time since a new Michigan Muni was set up. And so we would be breaking some ground in that way. And I think there are differing opinions about how long it might take. But I do want to tell a brief story from a long time ago. Back when I was in the County Board of Commissioners, I remember having a conversation with the then mayor. I was chair of the County Board of Commissioners. I think this was 2007. The mayor was John Heafja, and we were chatting about the opportunity that's in the state constitution for public power and just how much cheaper and how we could reach our climate change goals more quickly and more reliably if we were to do that. And you know, the city's a big customer, and so is the county. And so it really seemed to make sense from a lot of different perspectives. But one of the things that ended up holding us back in that conversation was, this is a big discussion, and it's got a lot of different moving parts, a lot of things to decide, and it's probably going to take years to make this happen, especially to create a full Muni. And, you know, at the time, we both thought, well, you know, this could be easily a 5 to 10 year project. And that's going to probably be longer than either of us will be in office. And so maybe we should focus on other ways to drive, you know, change and to get the city and the county more invested in addressing climate change. And now when I look back on that, I think, you know, years always seems like a long time until you look in the rearview mirror and you start to regret the fact that, you know, if we'd have pushed hard for that then, we could now be enjoying those benefits. And so my answer is, I think it's a multi-year process, probably somewhere in that range of 5 to 10. You know, but I think it's absolutely worth doing because the benefits could last forever. And it could, you know, this could be something that could benefit people who aren't here yet, who aren't in Ann Arbor yet, who will move here in a year, who will move here in 5 years, people who haven't even been born yet. And so, you know, that's what's exciting about bringing power to the people, is that we could really provide a lasting benefit to the climate and the economy of our city.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Senator Irwin. Same question over to you, Chris. What are the steps? How long might it take? And in your opinion, will it be worth it?
So the steps at a high level are, you've got to do some homework first. You do a feasibility study and evaluation. A valuation, not an evaluation. You do a feasibility study and you do a valuation. Then you hold an election. So ultimately, you know, the decision of power for the people is made by the people and not by anybody else. You decide on whether the best way to go is going to be to purchase existing assets or condemn them, or to construct your own and start over. And then depending on which option you choose, there are steps to implement each one of those options. There's some other approvals that you need to get regulatory wise. You figure out how to finance the utility, which, you know, public entities have some some tools at their disposal for that. And it's a solid business. It's a very stable, very low risk business compared with almost any other and it's a long-term business. So it's financeable. You get a franchise from yourself. In other words, from the city of Ann Arbor to do business in the city of Ann Arbor. You set rates. And then you have a couple of things you do with the Michigan Public Service Commission. Those are basically the steps. I couldn't tell you exactly how long it would take. As Senator Irwin mentioned, it's been a long time since Michigan municipal utility was created, but the steps, there's a roadmap. This is in the state constitution. It's in state statute. It's not a novel idea. It's fundamental to the government of the state of Michigan that you can do this. And I guess the question on will it be worth it is really one that's up to you all. I'm glad I'm on a municipal utility. I was glad to serve on the board of a municipal utility. I'm a believer in public power. That's for your community to figure out if it's worth it for you.
Thank you so much, Chris. All right. So will an Ann Arbor Muni have any impact on other communities served by DTE, positive or negative? Sean, would you be willing to take this on first?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So, and this is sort of reading the tea leaves. I don't think anybody knows exactly what would happen. As, Chris and others have pointed out, it's been a long time since a new Muni was founded in Ann Arbor. But looking at the statewide political scene and sort of the stranglehold that DTE and consumers have on the state legislature, this would be a shot across the bow for DTE, and it would weaken their position somewhat. And I think Michigan as a whole really needs strong communities like Ann Arbor who can lead on something visionary like this, and who can show that even today, with the Muni having not been established for a very long time, doing something like this is possible. And there's probably some changes that we could make as a state and that we could make in the state legislature. Hopefully, if we return a chamber full of Yousef Rabhis and a chamber full of Jeff Irwins after the 2022 election here, we could potentially make some legislative changes that would make it easier for communities that don't have the same resources that Ann Arbor does to be able to go down the road of creating municipal utility and owning their own power. But I think this is a step that would be a big positive as far as sending a message to DTE, showing other communities that this is possible, and potentially helping to pave a way for other communities who don't have the resources at this point to make a move like what Ann Arbor will hopefully be doing with creating a municipal utility here.
Thank you so much, Sean. Desirae, same question over to you. Will an Ann Arbor Muni have any impact on other communities served by DTE, positive or negative?
Yeah, I mean, these are of course guesses, but one of the things I think about for here, like, a smaller community like Ypsi, I wonder about how it could help us to do something similar, something that's in the area, thinking about the population that Ann Arbor has, how that really would make an impact, and whether that would help us to be able to do something like that in partnership, or even just, as folks have already said, that there hasn't been, a modern era Muni started. And so just having somebody go through that process, really pulling together, the framework of what that looks like, what the examples are, I think that would really go a long way to help other communities to be able to learn how to do that, and to make those kind of shifts. So I think that in and of itself would be a huge impact, because it's such a steep climb for a place like Ypsi to kind of take that on. And so that's why I've been watching really closely what happens in Ann Arbor. We already talked about the potential for like the jobs that could happen in other, local areas. So I think that's important. And as I was thinking about like potential negative impacts, of course, if Ann Arbor was to go public, then, DTE might then look to raise prices for the rest of us in the area to try to make up for that loss of customers. But, the thing is that DTE is going to raise prices anyway, as I already said. So really, it's just like another excuse to do so. Maybe it would be faster or steeper. I don't know. But, again, it's just guesses. But I just want, that to me is like probably the biggest negative, in terms of from another community in the area's perspective. But I'm not sure how that would exactly bear out. But I'm excited that Ann Arbor is at least moving forward with the feasibility study, because I think even that process will be helpful for us to be able to see what that looks like, in other areas.
Thank you so much, Desirae. All right, we are moving on to the final question. Liz, what sort of impact will municipalization have on energy sector employees and their respective unions?
Yeah, so people have been talking in the chat about the need for workers along with this effort, and does mention the need for good jobs for people in our community. So broadly, a sustainable energy transition has to be a just transition for workers and communities. And this means shifting economic control to communities and democratizing wealth in the workplace. It also means supporting workers and communities in the fossil fuel industry. So we have to make the distinction between the companies profiting off of an extractive economy and those who have worked hard, sometimes for generations, to provide the energy that we all use. So we have to respect the contribution of fossil fuel industry workers, and as a part of our transition, provide income support, retraining, deployment, and secure pension for older workers. So DTE employs a ton of people. Locally, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 17, represents 3,600 members who are linemen and women, tree trimmers, etc. And many of them work for DTE either as employees or as contractors. So we have to make sure that whatever plan we have includes good jobs for those workers and the workers that will need to be able to move to a sustainable energy plan. In my experience, the city and environmentalists and even pro-labor progressives tend to forget about workers. So I've been really encouraged by A2P2's commitment to ensuring a unionized workforce. And I want to talk about some of the different challenges to this, because we're going to have to work hard to make sure that workers are protected and supported throughout the process. So one, we want to be sure that union members currently employed by DTE are able to preserve their hard-won contracts with good pay and benefits if the city adopts public power. There's also a big issue with regards to building out our sources of renewable energy. So it's my understanding that one of the best ways to do this is to use purchase power agreements and local generation. So like many people have mentioned in the chat, rooftop solar and purchasing land for local generation. So right now, people have good union jobs with DTE. However, there aren't a ton of union workers at this moment to hire in renewable energy, and labor doesn't yet have a strong presence in this sector, for example, with rooftop solar installation. So non-union labor and non-skilled tradespeople are the ones taking these projects on. And there's actually plenty of explicitly anti-labor, anti-worker companies and contractors who are coming in from out of state to monopolize the jobs in the clean energy sector. And in other cities, these companies come in and they buy the land and then they sell it back to the municipality later, which is not what we want to happen. And actually, I was talking earlier to Ryan Hussey, who's the business manager for IBEW Local 252. And he was telling me about a company you may have heard of, Power Home Solar, which is a great example of what I'm talking about. So they've come in from out of town. They've got a bunch of class action lawsuits against them because they're charging ridiculous amounts for rooftop solar, and they're underperforming in terms of services. And what's more is, I believe IBEW Local 58 out of Detroit recently ran a union election for the workers employed by Power Home Solar. And Power Home is refusing to talk to the union. They're challenging the union every step of the way, challenging the workers who want to bargain for better conditions. And I actually read a bit about Power Home's NLRB objection to the election that the workers ran today. And it was extremely petty and clearly just a stunt to waste time and not be able to pay workers what they need and what they deserve. So right now, if DTE is the one buying the land, the labor will be unionized. And if it's private, it's going to be non-union, lower paying jobs. So we have to use this effort to ensure that we build out a unionized workforce. And that means working closely with the building trades, including IBEW. And that's related to another issue. So right now, a lot of the building trades, the unionized workers have the opportunity to train up new workers. There's not always an excess of qualified workers available to do the work immediately, but it's not just an issue of getting lots of new people trained up. It's also that we don't have the workers currently trained to do the work. So for example, IBEW has apprenticeship programs and they're really good. It's like 7,000 hours of training. And to keep these programs running, we need companies that are willing to hire apprentices that are being trained by experienced journeymen and women. And right now, IBEW has hundreds of people on their apprenticeship wait list. So if they know that there are good paying jobs waiting for graduates, for example, through a Muni, they can train a ton more people. And if we can get in the charter that we need to train electrical apprentices as a part of this effort, will allow many more workers to get good jobs, which ultimately helps our community.
Thank you so much, Liz. And Representative Rabhi, same question to you. What sort of impact will municipalization have on energy sector employees and their respective unions?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that question. And Liz did, again, an amazing job of answering it. And, you know, what I'll say is, again, this morning, I was standing out in the freezing cold with my brothers and sisters from the IBEW. When it comes to the workers of DTE, some of them were there. Some of the linemen and service workers at DTE were there, IBEW members. I will always stand in solidarity with them. And I would not be part of this effort for municipalization if there was any question in my mind that our municipal utility would be 100% unionized. And I think that has been a stated principle from the beginning of this A2P2 campaign. And I stand 100% and firmly in that commitment. When we have public power, we, the people, will be able to decide. And I think that it is unconditionally clear that the people of Ann Arbor will stand with labor and make sure that we are taking care of our workers and allowing for a just transition from the utility, investor-owned utilities to a municipally owned utility. Nothing that we have said here today is in any way, shape, or form antagonistic to the rights of the workers who are working for DTE. They are clocking in and out every day to feed their families. What I have an issue with is those that are profiting off of their labor. And to Desiree's point, in many ways, it doesn't matter whether it's a green energy company or a large utility monopoly. When the profit motive usurps, what unions are fighting for, basic wages, people being able to take home pay where they can feed their families and put diapers on their children, that's the fundamental problem here. And so when we municipalize, when we take control of our power, we can create an environment where the city and labor are working hand in hand to make sure that our community is successful. And that's really the vision of this. I met with Ryan Hussey over a year ago to discuss this municipalization effort. Him and I toured the IBEW facility where they're already training the next generation of workers. They have solar panels out front where they actually do training programs. They have an entire course load focused on solar. The IBEW and our brothers and sisters in labor and in other unions as well. There's several other building trades that work in the space. They are ready and willing to help us do the clean energy transition that we need. You know, the IBEW and the utility workers union are you know, fantastic and organized. And I think it would be a very easy transition for us to start working with them and make sure that there are those good paying union jobs, you know, on the table to make sure that we're keeping that talent around as well. And we can, again, we can do that when we have a municipally owned union. I do want to answer one of the questions in the chat, if that's okay, Greg. There's one question that I wanted to get to, which was, I believe, Ralph's question about the net metering issue and whether we can go back to a net metering environment, which helps to support distributed generation in the state of Michigan. As you all know, we used to have a system of net metering where a solar user would get compensated on a one-to-one basis for the energy that they generated. Using a 2016 energy law rewrite, the utilities were able to change that to what is now called the inflow-outflow system, where a distributed generation user is compensated only at wholesale rates, but they still have to buy energy back from the grid at retail rates from DTE and consumers. Can we reverse that? Because that has absolutely been hugely damaging to those that want to put solar on their homes. Can we reverse it? In my first term, I introduced a bill to remove that language. In my second term, I did the same thing. And now I'm in my third term. And right here on my desk is the bill to do it. I actually have it right here, and I plan to reintroduce it very soon. We can reverse that. The problem is, again, DTE and consumers have absolute monopoly and control over the legislative process. And I want to tell you a quick story of what I experienced in my first term. I had that bill, and I was sponsoring it with a Republican, actually, who agreed to sponsor the second. There's two bills, as you can see on my desk. I sponsored one, and a Republican was sponsoring one. We put out a co-sponsorship memo. We had the bills out on the floor. And one by one, our colleagues started to come and co-sign the bill to say, yes, we want to go back to a net metering system. We don't think that what the utilities did is fair. And they signed the bill. Somebody got a hold of it. They took a picture of the bill. They sent the list of sponsors to the utility lobbyists. And within minutes, they had mobilized all of their lobby team into the hallway. They brought all their multi-clients, all their in-house lobbyists out into the lobby. And they called in every member that had signed my bill one by one. And I watched them as they walked from the lobby to my desk, took their name off my bill after the utilities had badgered them and talked them out of it. They crossed their names out one by one. And the last one that came to my desk was that Republican who was going to sponsor the other bill. And he came up to me and he said, I'm sorry, man, getting too much pressure from the utilities. I can't do it. And he took his name off. So I had to sponsor both bills. I introduced them myself, but that shows you the power that these utilities have at influencing legislators and in making sure that good policy does not go into effect. We need to change the dynamics here. The power dynamics are all wrong. And to Desiree's point earlier about other communities, you know, frankly, in my ideal world, we would create a system of statewide municipal utilities so that we're, you know, so that we have everybody in the state in a system of publicly owned power, and we get away from this for-profit power system where $2 billion of our money that is being paid every year in our bills is going to Wall Street and not being invested in our communities, not being invested in our workers, not being invested in our infrastructure. We can do much better, and that's why we need this municipal utility now.
Thank you so much, Representative Rabhi. That concludes our prepared question segment of the discussion. So we will now be moving into questions from the audience. We've gotten a ton of great questions already, but please feel free to submit more. I find it unlikely that we will be able to get to all of them, but we will do our absolute best to get through as many as we can, and we will find ways to answer others in the coming days and weeks. There are some amount of repeated questions. I'm going to privilege those to be able to try to get as many birds with as few stones as possible. And for the panelists, if you would like to answer a question, if you could raise your hand in Zoom, and I will call on you in the order that you have raised your hand. Try to move through as many questions as possible, but please also feel comfortable to take some time and give good answers if you feel that it deserves it. And so starting off with a big one, and this is a common critique that we hear a lot talking about public power. How is this effort going to be different than the $28 million failed effort in Boulder, Colorado, given that the same federal laws apply? Now would anybody like to volunteer to take that on first? Chris, thank you.
Sure. So I put something in the chat on this, and I wasn't directly involved in the Boulder thing, and so I can't speak to it with firsthand knowledge. There were issues with the city charter in Boulder that enabled the incumbent investor-owned utility at the time, XL Energy, I think it was, to get involved in litigation with the city very early in their process. And those issues, I cannot imagine, exist in the Ann Arbor charter. I haven't reviewed it for that, but we did some reviewing of it at some point, and there was nothing that jumped out like that. There was also a funny ruling from the Colorado Public Utility Commission that involved basically, how would I say it? Asserting jurisdiction over the purchase by the city of Boulder of assets of the incumbent utility. In Michigan, by statute, with very limited exceptions in having to do with a couple of renewable energy efficiency issues, and a capacity demonstration requirement, the Michigan Public Service Commission has no other jurisdiction over municipal utilities. And then the other big difference, again, and I said this in the chat, but I'll say it again here. You know, the Michigan Constitution specifically provides for this. It specifically provides for local communities to form municipal electric utilities. And Michigan statute specifically provides for it and lays out the process for it. So there are steps to navigate, and the city would want to engage you know, people who knew what they were doing to guide you along that process. That was not me saying I wanted to do it. I don't want to do it, but you're going to have good professionals to help you navigate that. But we're talking about something that's very fundamentally embedded in state law, that you do have the right to do this. So talking about, you know, one community's experience in Boulder, Colorado, with a different community's experience in Ann Arbor, Michigan, under totally different state constitutions and entirely different sets of state laws, is very, very apples and oranges. I think that should be studied and lessons should be extracted from it. But the idea that, well, it happened to them, so it'll happen to us, even though we're in under entirely different laws concerning this subject matter, I think it's, I don't think that's right.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Liz, would you like to speak to that as well?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, it's my understanding, and I think somebody put a link to a video from my city council meeting in the chat, but it's my understanding that at least the representative from Boulder, Colorado, who talked about their process, didn't necessarily think of it as a failed process. They got huge concessions that they believed they wouldn't have been able to achieve without going down this path that allowed for better service for the residents. And so I think that that's also something to keep in mind, that we're heading down this path, and then it doesn't mean that it's a all or nothing effort, but it is important for the community to come together, to work together and fight for the conditions that we want to see that support our community.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz.
I think it's also important to note that Michigan is a different state from Colorado. When we have laws in the state of Michigan, as Senator Irwin said at the beginning, our Constitution has in it a reference to municipal utilities. This is part of who we are as a state. There are dozens of municipal utilities across Michigan. And so our regulatory environment here is much more favorable and supportive of the ability of communities to take charge of their own destiny and create municipal utilities. Will there be hurdles? Will DTE put up a fight? Of course they will. They have high-powered attorneys and millions of dollars at their disposal ready to, fight this, just as they do in the legislature. They spent $50 million buying the 2018 election, and they'll use that same money, which is you and I. That's the money that you and I spend on our utility bill every month to fight efforts like this as well. But our regulatory system is different, and I think that our opportunity is still great to be able to, win this fight.
Thank you so much, Representative Rabhi. Okay, so the next question that I wanted to move to has been asked in various different ways throughout the night. Ann Arbor is currently considering a few different proposals for reaching 100% renewable electricity. One of them is an SEU, a proposal that was put forward by the Office of Sustainability Initiatives that essentially proposes using this smaller scale strategy to build up a utility using microgrids without purchasing out the assets from DTE. And I think a lot of people want to know, does this work with a municipalization campaign? Are they oppositional campaigns? Is the SEU good enough? Could we get what we wanted simply with the SEU? And what extra benefits might we gain if we went all the way to full municipalization? So yeah, Senator Irwin.
Yeah, I mean, briefly, I see the SEU as a bridge to full municipalization. And it's a way to start working towards that goal more quickly and by implementing, meaningful steps that get us there, right? I mean, the goal here is, to have cheaper, reliable, cleaner power, and to democratize our power grid. And the more elements of our grid that are, part of this SEU, therefore publicly owned and operated, the more of those we get, the more we're building a network of those, which, becomes a utility over time. And so I think it also gives us an opportunity to, maybe there is an even better approach to getting where we're trying to go than actually, seizing the assets. The question's been asked many times, right? Like if there was an effort to municipalize that included, taking control through eminent domain of all of DTE's assets, there's going to be a big fight about how much those assets are worth. And we all know that DTE has been neglecting their infrastructure here in Ann Arbor. But when it comes to valuing it, they're going to say that it's extremely highly valued, and we're going to point it to all the deferred maintenance. It's going to be a big fight. If we are able to stand up a sufficient number of these microgrids, we may determine that acquiring their assets is not either necessary or advisable to providing the best service at the lowest rate to people. And so I believe that the SEU is a very interesting and promising bridge to municipalization.
Thank you, Senator Irwin.
If I could just add to that, Senator Irwin's comments triggered something, recollection that I wanted to mention on Liz's comments too about, and so this connects to this idea of creating these microgrids. And there's already been some proposals and some talk about creating these microgrids on some developments that are happening in Ann Arbor. And I want to say that, I've been working very closely with a large building trades union that is looking to get more involved in helping to build these solar projects and transition their workforce into the clean energy space, to Liz's point earlier. And because a lot of the projects that are going up are private projects that are being done by a specific developer, within their project, it is a lot harder for us to influence whether or not that project is going to be done at the hands of union labor, or whether it's going to be done, to Liz's point, from contractors that use unscrupulous practices and exploit their employees. And so there's specifically this project that we've been working on. We've been in several meetings in solidarity with our union brothers and sisters to try to push the developer in the right direction. But there's been talk that this project may move into the SEU space. And if it does, again, if there's municipal, control of that process, I think it gives a lot more power and leverage to the public being able to control the process and make sure that employees on the job site are treated with fairness and dignity. And that speaks to exactly what Liz was saying. We can't just rely on these private contractors to move our clean energy future forward. We have to have some public accountability. It's the only way that we're going to make sure that the transition is just, and that employees, the workers in these on these job sites, are not being exploited, are not being, to the point of the rally earlier today, are not being called the N-word on the job site and abused by their employer. That's just a completely unacceptable framework, and we need to make sure that our workforce is supported and has the right to organize. What Power Home Solar is doing is completely unacceptable, and we need to make sure that there are, by the way, several union-friendly contractors that have been starting to do some work. We need to make sure that we're encouraging and supporting what they're doing, and make sure that is a big part of this. But the SCU is a step in the right direction. But to what Jeff said, I believe that ultimately we're going to need a full municipal system, and we may see that this SCU becomes just a network and ultimately grows into a full municipal system. But at the end of the day, I do have some questions about how it's going to be implemented and what is actually going to happen here, and how we're looking at issues around justice and equity, who's getting the solar panels, who's going to be focused on for these microgrids first. There's a lot of unanswered questions that I would like to see answers to, but I hope that if we go the SCU route, that it is building towards the ultimate goal of having a full municipal utility so that everyone is in, no one is being left out, and we're not just doing this piecemeal approach. If it's the first thing that we want to do to step in the right direction, I'm okay with it, as long as we're moving towards that full municipal future. The other thing I want to say, there was a question, Greg, about community choice aggregation and whether that could be a potential route that we go. Community choice aggregation, the main reason that it's problematic is it's not allowed currently under state law. We would need a major change to our state legislation to allow for that to happen. Currently, municipalization is allowed. As we said before, it's in our Constitution. It's something that we can do today, whereas community choice aggregation would take legislative change. And using the example that I did earlier of how hard it is to get basic legislation passed in Lansing that the utilities don't like, I can guarantee you that it is going to be like pulling teeth to get a community choice aggregation bill moved through the legislature. The utilities will fight it tooth and nail.
Thank you so much, Representative Rabhi. Another commonly asked question has been, how exactly can we ensure that a municipal utility is green? There are certainly public power utilities across the country that aren't particularly green. What could we do different to make sure that we have a renewable energy system with our municipal energy system? Desirae.
I mean, I'll just say that and this isn't a highly technical answer, but I'm an organizer, I'm a community organizer, and so it's up to the people. It's up to us. And whereas we don't have that ability with DTE, but with a public, utility, the public actually has some power in that space. And so I think that it's part of the folks on the ground pushing for that and calling for that and making sure that that's prioritized and making sure that that's part of the value of the public utility going online to do that. And to set that out from the beginning, which we would have the opportunity to do in something like this. And the other thing I would say, just based on, when I was at the Energy Commission meeting where there were those presentations from some of the other groups, but one of the things that they talked about was that some of it also depends on what you're prioritizing when starting it. And so they said that, they were prioritizing cost. They weren't prioritizing green, being a green utility. But that's something that they then have switched to. They have changed to doing that and looking at bringing on more and more of that. And so that's part of, a change in their focus and strategy. So I think that it's also important to think that, maybe some, when some of the utilities started off, that wasn't their primary concern. Their primary concern could have been reliability. That was something else that another group said, that they really were trying to make sure that their power could stay on because they were having so many issues with that. And so that was what they prioritized. So I think a lot of it is, what are we prioritizing up front? And saying that having a green energy is something to prioritize, I think, and then keeping that pressure and that accountability going forward is the way to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Desirae. So another thing that I think that a decent amount of people have actually asked about is DTE's program for this green power that they're selling. They charge a little bit extra to be able to sell you green power. As one of the question askers put it simply, is this a scam, or is there something to this? Chris.
So I do the cases that deal with the approval of the rates and tariffs for my green power and the resources that are included in that portfolio. There are good things about it's a mixed bag. What happens with my green power is that you agree to have certain amounts of the energy that you use attributed to, as an accounting matter, to renewable resources. Right now, those resources are resources that are already in DTE's portfolio. So that it's not additive. You're not causing directly the addition of renewable resources. On the other hand, if there was a ton of demand for these programs, it would result in the utility going out and adding additional renewable resources. And so that would be a good thing. The other part of the program which is important to understand, is that you're in some way subscribing to certain amounts of renewable energy, but you're still being charged for the costs of the legacy fossil generation, right? So the renewable is a layer on top of your underlying rates. And this is one of the problems with the SCU as well, is that you're still paying for all the costs associated with the Bell River coal-fired power plant, which is right now, online until 2028, and DTE is asking for $2.5 million in their current rate case to study repowering that plant to gas, to run for decades after in gas. You're still paying for the Monroe power plant, which is currently scheduled to retire in 2040, which is, I think, the second largest coal-fired power plant in the United States. You're paying for I can't even say the name. We call it the BWEC. It's the new gas plant. I can't call it the Blue Water Energy Center. I just can't. The big combined cycle gas plant, $1.1 billion, which is going to come online this year and operate for 30 or 40 years. So you're paying for all of that. And then on top of that, they're netting out via sort of a market formula the attribution of some of your usage to renewable energy, or maybe all of your usage to renewable energy. And so there's a savings and a cost associated with that, but it's all hovering on top of the continued payment of legacy costs. So is it better than not doing it? Definitely. It's definitely better to sign up for My Green Power than not, partly because the utilities are going to respond to customer demand. And so if customers are demanding more renewable energy, via My Green Power, DT will have to start by the mid-2020s adding additional renewable energy to their portfolio to do it. It's not getting rid of the costs or the legacy pollution of the big fossil resources in their portfolio. So it's a mixed bag.
Thank you, Chris. And Desirae.
This is actually just a question that I have that I'm hoping Chris or somebody else might be able to answer, because I was wondering about when looking at that myself, like for our household, and thinking about whether that includes things like waste to energy, like in Canton or something like that, like if that's supposed to be part of what this green energy is drawn from, or more clean energy or something, because I know there's a lot of ways that energy companies use that, whereas we know that that's actually not much better. So I just that was just a question if that is something that's included within that.
So that's a great question, and it's not included in that. Right now it's the Lapeer Solar Park and one of the Thumb wind energy projects. And they will have to add resources to it. But basically there's a wind option, a solar option, and a wind solar blended option. So you don't, that's one thing you don't have to worry about with My Green Power. The resources being used for the program are genuinely green.
Thank you, Chris. Representative Rabhi.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, I think, for me, the bottom line is to the question, is it worth it? I personally don't see the value. So maybe Chris and I slightly disagree on this, and maybe I'm wrong, but a few things and the reasons I say that. The first is DTE is required to have a renewable energy portfolio currently that they have to meet. I believe that it's 15% by last year. They had to invest in renewable energy anyways. And so up until last year, people that were buying their, paying this additional rate, they had to do that anyways. And so whether or not you were, to Chris's point earlier, whether or not those that were participating in the program were actually helping to expand our renewable energy generation in the state of Michigan is sort of questionable. Now, will it happen in the future if a lot of people sign on? Maybe. But, again, I think getting back to the main point here, why should we have to pay? It should not have to pay extra for this. That's the bottom line. Clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. So the idea that you have to pay more to move us to a clean energy future is asinine. And to me, it helps, first of all, it helps to support what they're already required to do. It helps us further and support their profit line and protect, if you're paying extra and giving them extra money, even if they invest all of that in green energy, they're protecting their profit margin by still collecting the baseline amount from you and by charging you extra. And so for me, it only, instead of spending your money on the Green Currents program, spend your money on trying to get us to a municipal utility. I think, to me, that's a much more worthwhile use of your time and treasure, because it will actually create lasting, sustainable impact in our state. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully Senator Irwin can chime in, and I see him unmuting there.
I wasn't intending on unmuting. I was just checking out the chat, and there's a lot of action there. I generally agree with what both of you said. I mean, I think Mr. Bzdok hit the nail on the head in explaining the sort of pluses and minuses. For me, ultimately, I've chosen not to participate for some of the reasons that Yousef mentioned, but also just because of some key words that Mr. Bzdok said. He said that they attribute through, accounting, methodologies that your money is going to the renewable energies, but really, the power that we're getting is coming from Monroe, right? And that's stopping the fact that the power we're using here is coming from one of the largest, dirtiest coal plants in the world is what I'm trying to do. I want to stop that reality, and participating in the green purchasing program doesn't stop that. It just, through an accounting method of attributing my, cost to more green energy might encourage DTE in the future to invest in more green energy. So I don't participate.
Thank you so much to Representative Rabhi and Senator Irwin.
And Chris.
And Chris, everyone. Yes. So moving on, and we are moving on to 8:30, but hopefully we can push a little bit past that just to kind of ask this pretty commonly asked question here. So currently, Ann Arbor certainly is talking about municipalization in Ann Arbor, but are there opportunities to expand this? Maine is considering it at a statewide level. There's a lot of interest in doing this in Ypsilanti or in the townships around Ann Arbor. What types of challenges are involved in that, and what types of possibilities and opportunities are there to make that type of move?
I mean, I can jump in. I just feel like I'm talking a lot. I want to give other people the opportunity, but I think, like I said earlier, I think ultimately it would be an ideal world if we could create a statewide, publicly owned system. That would be amazing. Short of that, I would love to see us expand our vision for, Ann Arbor municipalization to all of Washtenaw County. We already have the city of Chelsea that has their own municipal utility. They can provide a model for us, on how to move forward. There was also a question or a comment, I think it was Tim in the chat, that mentioned that city in Tennessee has created essentially a combined electrical and cable system. That would definitely be a game changer. I would look to the city of Wyandotte as a potential model there. Wyandotte actually provides not only electrical, but they also provide municipal cable. They provide municipal water and sewer, of course, and they also provide municipal like cable television. So you can buy cable television packages from the city along with your internet service as well. So they provide kind of a full suite of public services. And when we start looking at access to internet in particular, internet really should be a public utility. It should be something that, especially now, as we've seen during the course of this pandemic, it has become an issue of equity and making sure that everybody has access to the internet. It should be a public utility so that we can guarantee access for everyone. And we can do that when we're starting to build out this infrastructure and create a municipal utility. There are opportunities to take a model like Wyandotte and say, what else can we do through the city and through our communal resources to make sure that we are providing for our communities.
And just to repeat something that Desirae said earlier, there are a lot of communities across the state who could benefit from, having cheaper, cleaner, more reliable power. But getting over that hurdle of, cutting that path towards creating a Muni in the modern era is something that someone needs to do. And so, if Ann Arbor takes this on for all the right reasons, because we would get better service for our citizens at a lower rate and contribute more to the fight against climate change, what that will do is it will provide the benefit to all the other communities in Michigan as to how this is done, what it looks like, how long it takes. So all these questions of both a legal and technical nature that we're going to have to answer. Right? And so being able to do that, being able to model this path is a huge benefit, as Desirae mentioned.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Desirae.
No, I just saw somebody in the chat, it's kind of related, but was asking about how folks who don't live in Ann Arbor could support this effort. And I just, because I think that one of the nice things too for Ann Arbor, when they have public comment, right, they really stress it's not just for people who live, it's for people who live, work, and are educated, right, in this space. So I think that, or kind of go and play in Ann Arbor. And I think that a lot of us probably fill one of these different kind of positions. So I think being, tuning in, speaking up at comment and things like that to show our support, I think is important to do. And I'm sure that Ann Arbor Public Power will have some kind of action steps or things for us to think about as well. So I'll let y'all do that. But I do think it's important for us to show that kind of support because, again, if Ann Arbor can start this and it could open up a lot of other possibilities for other spaces. And I think trying to get past some of, when thinking about what might be some hurdles, we have to really think about like all of the folks that are elected in all these spaces and having those conversations and trying to hold them to wanting to try something different too. So that, those conversations will not necessarily be easy just even if they pass through Ann Arbor, right? So I think, my hope would be that And I say this, I say this all the time, right, is that, if we're able to make this move and we can show solidarity and show up for Ann Arbor public power and folks, that then when we look to go do something, that we can then turn back and say, hey, y'all, can you come help us and support us too? And so I think that that's another reason to kind of be able to show up, as we can.
Thank you so much, Desirae. I really appreciate what you said there. As a moderator, I try not to speak too much, but I personally live in Ypsilanti, and I do this work every day because I believe that it is just the most efficient way that we can really reduce the amount of carbon that we're emitting and create more power within our community. So definitely there's opportunities outside of Ann Arbor to get involved and to contribute. Representative Rabhi.
I have to jump off the call, unfortunately, soon, but I hope that we can take a few minutes before we end this to talk about rates, because I see some comments in the comment list about rates going up and DTE, and all that. And I want to say that if you look at the data across Michigan, generally what you will find is that municipal utilities charge far less for their for electric service than the investor-owned utilities do. You have to remember that DT and consumers have basically a guaranteed 10% profit margin. So every time you pay your bill, more or less 10% of that is going to the utility profit margin. And so right off the bat, that's not something that municipal utilities have to worry about. That is a cost efficiency that municipal utilities have. They don't have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about paying tens of millions of dollars to their CEOs. That's not something that municipal utilities have to worry about. There are cost savings with municipal utilities, and generally bills are lower. One example of that I would just mention, Jeff and I actually recently visited a marijuana facility, a huge grow operation in Marshall, Michigan. And they had chosen to locate in Marshall, Michigan, because Marshall has their own municipal utility. And the rates that they could get in Marshall were better than the rates that they could get from consumers, which is serviced all the surrounding areas. And so here's an example of economic development of a business actually moving to a community because they had lower rates as a result of having a municipal utility. So there's examples of that all across the state. And if you look at utility bills in Lansing, compare them to utility bills in Ann Arbor, you will find that there is a huge difference, and that in a municipal utility, generally speaking, rates are lower, service is more reliable, as we've talked about quite a bit already. But I just wanted to make sure that we took a few moments to talk about the lower bills that people will see, more than likely, as that's the data that we have from across the state.
Fantastic. Thank you for throwing that in, Representative Rabhi. I have also seen a lot of people asking if we could maybe do just one more quick question, and then I think we really should end it for the night, as we have gone over a little bit. But a lot of people have been asking, how exactly is the university involved with this? Could we have a joint system? Would it be two different systems? Would the what type of role would the university play in municipalization?
I think that's still to be determined. Obviously, the University of Michigan is governed by the regents of the University of Michigan, but this is something that's been on the mind, I think, of everybody who's been involved in this effort from the very beginning. I remember one of the very first meetings that Greg and I had together where we were talking about this, and I don't know if I said it just this way, but it's like, well, gosh, if U of M were in, then it would be a real no-brainer, right? I mean, cheaper, cleaner, more reliable power generally seems like a good idea no matter who's involved, but if U of M were to bring their generation and their network to the table and their resources, obviously that would be a game changer, and it would, propel this project forward faster, and it would just make it even more of a good idea. So, I think we need to get the, a good feasibility study and a really good valuation of the existing assets to make good decisions on behalf of the community, and to put those, put that data in the hands of the voters so that they can make a good decision. But conversations are happening with regents, and if U of M was in, wow, that would be just a huge, huge benefit.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. And Liz.
Yeah, so I used to be the staff organizer for the Graduate Employees Organization, the U of M grad workers. And we work to try to help out the A2P2 with getting the DTE contracts between the university and DTE, and the university's response was, you have to FOIA us, and that's been that was, I think, like 8 or 9 months ago. And so there's definitely people within the university to put pressure on, but it's likely possible that the regents who are elected statewide, their constituents are everyone in the state of Michigan who votes. There's an opportunity to put pressure on the regents too, and make sure that they know that this is a priority not only for people in Ann Arbor, but for others as well, to make sure that this public institution is committed to climate goals, to supporting the community, et cetera, especially with, workers working from home during a pandemic and needing reliable sources of electricity to do their work. And so that's just to say that they're public officials too, and there are people within the university that folks can put pressure on to ensure that U of M is helping to move this effort forward.
Thank you so much, Liz. All right, we certainly have a large amount of questions left, but we are past our scheduled end time, and I want to respect all of our panelists' times. So we do need to bring this to a close. I want to thank all of you so much for sharing your wisdom, speaking to these really important issues, and giving a lot of much needed perspective on this really important decision, oftentimes considered one of the most monumental and important decisions that a city can make, is how they're going to handle their power system. So thank you all so much for being here. Also, thank you to everyone who has attended, who has asked questions and contributed in the chat. Really appreciate all of your input. There are opportunities to get involved with this effort if you would like. AnnArborForPublicPower.org is our website has a lot of great info on how to get involved with the organization and also learn about municipalization generally. You can also email us at AnnArborPublicPower@gmail.com. And we will try to respond to any questions or comments that you have there. We will be releasing this video on YouTube and posting it around so that you can reference it and share it later. And we will be having future events like these, hopefully moving to a monthly basis with a variety of different speakers on that can cover a large swath of areas of expertise. So thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.